Turning to our top story, and that is the government's response to the coronavirus crisis. Joining us live is Matt Cranston from the Australian Financial Review. Matt, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Annalise.
Now, the Prime Minister's speech this morning gave the best indicator we've had of what this stimulus package will look like, and it's really interesting to see that he's putting a lot of the onus back on businesses to step up.
Yeah, well, that's right. But, I mean, the biggest thing I thought out of that speech that reverberated through the market was that he thinks this is going to be bigger than the GFC. Which potentially shows you the strain he's already hearing that are on businesses. So he knows to focus it and channel it in there. But yeah, he's absolutely pushed back and said, well, you guys have got to come to the party, make sure that you pay your bills on time, which is one of the biggest effects for small and medium-sized businesses in Australia is they're not paid on time by bigger businesses.
And government departments a lot of the time as well.
True, yeah, and they've just had some reform on getting that done, getting the payments in earlier, or you can charge them interest. Yeah, that's huge. I think it's about something like $7 billion a year that small and medium-sized businesses miss out on. And cash flow is the key source of insolvencies for small and medium-sized businesses. As soon as the cash flow dries up, and sometimes it's only 1 or 2 months, then that cascades throughout the whole economy, and you end up in strife.
I tell you what, I'm feeling a bit vindicated because I said this could be worse than the GFC 2 weeks ago, and I had everyone jumping down my throat. So yeah. I'm happy this morning on that point. Yeah. But this is quite an alarming thing for the economy to be dealing with right now. We've seen that they've completely thrown out the idea of a surplus at this point. Do you think we'll be looking at cash payments coming through to people like we saw during the GFC? Yeah.
I think what will happen, obviously since Sunday they've still been working on the finer points of it. I'm now starting to think that's more likely to show up in the budget in 8 weeks' time, and that's part of the scalable approach, so to speak. So the first big thing will be businesses. They'll get money to ensure that the workforces are maintained, and we've just heard from Christian Porter and Sally McManus coming out of their meeting in Sydney discussing basically the challenges they face. It was just a matter of saying this is what the problem's going to be like. But Sally did say she heard good things from big business saying that they would hold on to employees. So yeah, but to go back to your question, I don't think the straight cash payments might happen on Thursday when we are likely to hear this stimulus. That's maybe more likely to come through in the budget, and what we might get is the big boost for business to maintain employers and cash flow.
Because you've made the good point that if you're quarantined at home, a cash stimulus payment might help with the bills going down, but it's not really going to stimulate the economy much if you can't go out and spend it.
That's right. I'm sort of calling it the Netflix stimulus, because really, if you're seeing sort of, Italy's, not that applies here yet, and we have to be careful to make sure that we don't panic anyone. But you are seeing schools close. So what do? Do they go to the shops instead? They're not going to the school, so why would they go to shopping centres? So what do? They're watching online streaming, and they're buying food, and so you've got to think about how this is going to create. How can you get money to households to stimulate the economy when they may be feeling as though they should stay at home? That's hard. That's hard to get through. At least in the GFC, you give money to people and they might go, oh, well, I'll go to the shops and I'll go out to movies, I'll go out to restaurants, I'll go out and about. This is a much harder form of stimulus, I think, and it's going to be a real test.
And on that point you raise about not inciting panic, we have seen a lot of it already, and that makes people behave in a pretty irrational way, and that's been playing out on the markets a lot as well. Yeah, well,
the most amazing thing I've just heard in the last hour or so was that Iran has just released 70,000 prisoners. And that, to me, it makes me think about, well, what happens, when there's so much restriction? What happens to rubbish collection and to essential services? This stuff all must have contingency plans. But yeah, so that's some of the things that will still weigh on investors' decisions about whether or not to reinvest in the stock market. But also then you've heard just from Trump and people talking about big stimulus package in the US, and that's come after the market close in the US, and that's probably why Australia is probably seen actually going back into the green today in the stock market today.
It is just so hard to keep track of. But just finally,
it's very fast moving, incredibly fast moving. Yeah.
And just finally, the NAB business confidence figures have come out this morning.
Yeah, that's right. So just released, and they've shown that during February, firms have reported a sharp decline in inventories and in forward orders. It's not as sharp as has been in past months, since I think before 2016 there were sharper declines. But what it's saying is they did start to feel that effect from coronavirus and supply chain disruptions from possibly even bushfires as well. And it's probably going to get worse because the PMI index in China, which is the factory and manufacturing output, that was the worst in February it's ever been. And that is likely to then play into what we feel in March. So I suspect that NAB survey is showing just the beginning of something that might get a little bit hairier.
And this is interesting. This is on the backdrop of speculation that we could actually be heading towards a technical recession, that we could have 2 quarters of negative growth. Do you think that feeds into the idea that that's on the cards?
Absolutely. I think, Bill Evans, he's one of the leading veteran economists, and he's saying you'll see contraction, so negative growth, 0.3 in both March and June quarters. That if you're the government and you're trying to avoid that, that's roughly $6 billion worth of hit to the economy. So you've got to try and make up $6 billion in one of those quarters to avoid the recession. They're hardly going to try and make up for it in the March quarter because it's almost gone. So they need to this is why I'm thinking more like a $5 to $10 billion stimulus package, because they've got to try and make up that big gap. And I really do think they're trying to avoid a technical recession and not just avoid something that's a longer, deeper downturn. Because
that would be such a political hit for the government.
Massive.
To be the first to preside over a recession of more than 20 years.
Massive, yeah.
Do you think, as you said, the discussion has been around that $5 to $10 billion stimulus amount? Do you think there's any potential it could go higher, or is $10 billion...
I'm just not going to say. It's hard for me to work out. I don't think it would, because they have been... For one, it's got to be so targeted and so measured and so precise. That's hard to do. So the way you do it is you feed it in, so there'll be a couple of billion first and then it's scaled up, and that's why they keep using the word scalable, because they want to test it, see how that's working and then increase it. But I just don't know. I'm not going to put a number on it. I think that's silly for me to try and have a go at that.
Can you explain, because we keep saying scalable a lot. I think your average punter would probably not actually know what that is, even though it sounds like it should be simple. Is that just like cash payments that they could make a cheque bigger later down the track? Or?
Yeah, it just means adjust the size of, So I think that in the GFC, they started off giving payments, I think, to people under 90,000 income, and then they increased it to everyone. So that's sort of a way you could say it's scalable.
Because it seems like, from what Matthias Cormann's been saying in particular, that they're not going to have this cash splash. But when you ask specifically about, well, what about pensioners getting an extra cheque, or New Start recipients, they haven't been as quick to shut that down. That's
right, because that's more effective in a way, because that's just through adjusting the transfer payments. So people who are getting New Start or pensions, or, sorry, I didn't mean to say New Start, but who are on any sort of welfare, that can change within a week. You just sign an order and the bureaucracy gets that through. Whereas if it's sort of tax cuts and rebates, that's a little bit more cumbersome, a little bit more administrative, and so that'll take longer as well. And the whole thing about this is you've got to try and get this stimulus in fast, really fast, to try and avoid the repercussions down the path.
And I know I already said just finally, but I mean it this time. Last question. It was Matt Thistlethwaite this morning was saying that the government's been slow to respond to the coronavirus, that they could have been quicker with stimulus coming through. Do you think it has been a bit slow?
I think when you consider how this is so different compared to others, I don't think it's slow. I think people in Treasury would be telling you, bloody hell, just calm down. We're trying to get this sorted. And if you rush these things, it can really blow up. So I think look, I don't know. The proof will be in the pudding, and I can't wait to see what comes out on Thursday to really assess it and to give it a score.
I think we're all waiting for Thursday. Matt Cranston, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.